This video is sponsored by Aerialvisions. Today we're going to be building a TBS Discovery with naze32 flight controller. Discovery and naze sent to me by Aerialvisions. Thank you, Hugo. Put the frame together so anyone who's new to this frame can see what it looks like together, assembled. I've just thrown some screws in it really fast so you can see the general shape. This is a camera plate. It sits up front here and it's soldered in place. These are the arms. They're DJI 450 arms. You can also use knockoff ones like this. The hole pattern should be the same as in the normal arms, but we'll check later on in the video. And the motors sit out here. Your ESCs generally sit on the bottom of the arm, and they are soldered to the power distribution board on the inside. And the flight camera will sit up front on the left. The GoPro will sit on the right, or any GoPro size camera. I've seen people use the Mobius as well. And then of course there are the headers on the back and on the inside that allow for your receiver to be sat in the back, plugged easily into your flight controller. And of course all the integration on the inside of the board, which I'll show in a minute. Really fast, let's test the mounting pattern on these knockoff arms. These are hobbyking arms. They're junk. They say HJ on them, I believe, and we're just going to test if they fit. So if you're out there and you're planning on building one of these and you've got these arms, you can see if you need to get new ones. Lo and behold, the mounting pattern looks like it does fit on top. As well as on the bottom. So if you're using these HJ arms, you should be good. So here's the Discovery bottom frame plate. We've already screwed in all of these spacers that are included in the kit with these screws that are included in the kit. However, these drivers are not included, so get some hex drivers if this is your first build. The integration I was talking about earlier. Up here, you've got a cam in port. So if you're using the TBS core, you can put your camera plate up front in place. You can set your FPV cam here and plug it in. If you're using TBS cameras, the cables can plug directly into here. Those cables are included with the kit. Or if you're using other cameras, you can make a cable to plug into here, or you can solder directly onto these pads here and solder on the TBS core as well. And the TBS core is a voltage regulator for your video transmitter and your camera, as well as an on-screen display. So you plug this in, you plug in your video transmitter as well, or you can solder it in here, and you change the settings to 5 volts / 12 volts for both the camera and the video transmitter, depending on the voltage your video transmitter and camera run off of. And that way you have nice and neat wiring. You put the camera here, the video goes in, the video goes out. You don't have a mess of wires or anything. Here is power distribution. You've got your plus and your minus, plus and minus for 4 separate ESCs, which this quad is intended for. However, I'm not going to be using 4 ESCs. I just don't have them. I have a 4-in-1 ESC I'm actually going to be using on this build. And that is nice because it takes up, it does take up less room. I can also put it on the inside, so it will be easier for me to waterproof the quad, which I will be doing. However, you don't have that modularity if you lose an ESC. If you lose an ESC, you've got to replace the whole 4, which is really a pain. So I would not recommend going with the 4-in-1 ESC. It's just what I have right now. Zippy 5000 milliamp LiPo 4-cell. It fits nicely in the frame, and what I'll do is you put the battery in here. The power leads are soldered, the negative on the top here, and the negative on the bottom here, and the positive on the top here. And that way you get your leads coming right back, and you can plug in the wire just like that. No footprint, doesn't get in the way of the props. It's great. Of course, up here you've got the holes spaced out for standard flight controllers, as well as the lines if you're going to use a naze, which most people do. And there's also a built-in current regulator here for the core. And there's also positive and negative ports throughout the frame. If you're planning on plugging in small things that don't require large current draw, you can use these. I'm probably not going to be using these in my build. I'll just use the large plates since they're all in parallel the same way. I also will be waterproofing this build to the best of my abilities, so I'll be able to fly in rain, snow, pretty much any weather, which would be great. But enough talking about the frame, let's get to it. So here's the ESC I'm going to be using on this build. It's a Q-Brain 25 amp 4-in-1 ESC. It's a little scratched up and a bit of a mess, but that's because I've used it on a few other builds. What I think I'm going to do is mount the Q-Brain like this. That way it's very close to this port that I can solder onto, and it's also central in the frame. So let's go ahead and solder it on first. I've just gone and cut the wires to a length appropriate to fit that solder pads right there in the power distribution board. And since these are large solder joints, I'll be able to use my soldering gun, which has a very large tip on it. However, if you're doing the headers on the naze, or maybe even the headers on Discovery, although they are a little bit different, so I'll show you later, you might want to use a finer tip soldering iron like I will do, for the naze at least. Alright, that's soldered. Now we're going to stick it down with some 3M tape. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to solder these headers on using my soldering gun. The difference between the headers on the naze board and the TBS is that if you look really closely, you can actually see the headers here don't really stick out. They just fit in and they pop out just a little bit, which is perfect because it doesn't glob too much around a group of the pins. It'll glob around one pin and it'll move on if the iron is hot enough with a thick enough tip. With this, you need a very thin tip soldering iron because they protrude pretty far out, and if you're to use a soldering gun with the thick tip, it'll glob around all of the pins and make a mess. So you could use a thin tip for both the TBS as well as the naze board. However, you can only use a thick tip soldering gun on the TBS headers. Now I'm going to go through with part of a multimeter and check the shorting. Oh. Now that I've checked all of the solder connections with the multimeter, I'm going to cover the solder connections with some liquid electrical tape to prevent them from shorting out in case of weather or water or anything gets on them. We're actually going to cover the connections with it. And we'll let that dry or solidify or do whatever liquid electrical tape does to become solid. Or the next thing you should do is get your naze32 all soldered up and ready to go. Alright, well here's the naze board. I've soldered on what I have to solder on, plus this, which I'm not going to use. Yeah, that's about it. There's the naze board, and it's going to sit here on some foam tape. I'm not seeing power on this board or on the receiver when I plug this into the computer, so I believe that I need to solder the power cable to the Discovery, and then with that soldered in, the ESC will power the frame, and the frame will power the battery will power the frame, which will power the ESC, which will power the naze, as well as the receiver, hopefully. And that's not going anywhere. Let's see what happens when we power it on. Alright, that is a good sign. Let's plug in the board, connect to base flight, connected. So I've got this little servo extension cable. I've pulled the signal wire out because I'm not going to be using it. Shut that off. And I'm going to solder it to eeny, meeny, miny. Let's put it on this port. Actually, you know what? Let's not, because the cable will come down. You know, actually there's the most room here. Let's solder it to this. It doesn't matter which it's soldered to because they're all in parallel, but I'm going to go ahead and solder. Oh, I should have soldered it the other way. Oh well. Now I'm going to move these out of the way. I'll feed them through the arms later. Let's unplug the receiver since that's not being used. And let us put the arms on. I'm going to put these arms in the back. Also, yeah, another long story. I'll be switching these to black arms as soon as they arrive. I've ordered some. But for now, I'll be using these arms that I've used on some various projects. So they've got some interesting features. No, thank you, Deadmos. Alright, now using the supplied screws, I believe they are 2.0 millimeters. Yep, 2.0. I'm going to install the arms to the frame. Now, a lot of people like installing the motors to the frame, but I don't know, I just like putting the arms on first. Alrighty then. Let's flip this over and feed the leads through the arms. Also, Loctite. Some people swear by it, some people don't really use it. Some people just don't have a preference, use it on some builds, use it on others. I don't really use Loctite. I mean, I've never had any problems with the screws coming out in flight, and I've been building for over 2 years, so I don't know. Loctite if you want, if not, don't, but most people recommend it. I'm fine without. Just make sure they're screwed in good. Alright, there we go. Now let us feed the rest of the motor leads, or the ESC leads through. Now these are the motors I'm going to be using with this build. They're the multi-star 22, 13, 9, 35 kV, 3 to 4 cell, unlike most multi-star motors, which are 3 cell. These are only available, well, though they're not available through the US warehouse, they're available pretty much everywhere else. So I've actually ordered them online, and they should be showing up in the next few weeks. This motor here, I just stole from Manix Quad for a minute, so I can test the length of the ESC leads and where I need to zip tie them up in here to neaten up the wiring. So I'm gonna sit the motor here, not even screwed in. Let's feed these through a hole, and let's plug them in. Okay, the bullet connectors need to be about here. I'm gonna mark that on this arm with some tape that I've got, some wing tape. The bullet connectors need to be about there. So on this arm as well, the bullet connectors need to be about 3 down. About there's so here is where I will zip tie those motor leads, or those ESC leads, to keep some things neat. That is more than neat enough for me. Now what we'll do is test that the lengths are alright. If not, they can actually be pulled out a little bit because of the way I've zip tied them. Now the next step is responding to a text. So here's what I have so far. That mess, I gotta neaten that one up. Here's the build so far. Top plate on, which it looks like. I'm happy with it so far. I'm gonna put my 1.3 GHz video transmitter up top, my easy UHF light receiver in the back. These multi-star motors, which are on their way from China, on here. Maybe actually I'll test it with Manix motors just to see how it goes with no FPV setup. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and throw Manix motors on it right now, and he's gonna kill me, which is, it's all good, but let's see if it flies. Here, I had the ESC lead that had the power on it plugged in upside down, So I was having a little bit of problems. I just flipped it over, got my receiver on the back, got the battery in there, got the battery strap. I've thrown a few screws in each of the arms, so I'm going to go outside now and do its line of sight maiden. Alright, let's give it a shot.